Before we move on to our third door of immigration history, we would like to review the first two doors. The first door is open door policy. If you remember, it goes from the creation of the United States till 1880, and you see a lot of Germans and Irish coming in. And even though the door was open, you will see a lot of discrimination against these groups and prejudice that they're going to have to deal with. And then from 1880 to 1920, we have what was called the door ajar, where we see a lot of immigrants coming in, 1 million per year, but you're going to see a shift in Europe. It's going to be the South Central Europeans like the Slovaks, the Poles, the Italians, and they're going to be really segregated in various neighborhoods. But you're also going to see a negative time period where we tell the Chinese we don't even want you to come. We'll do a similar thing with the Japanese at the Gentleman's Agreement. And now we get to 1920, so let's talk about this new door that we're getting to. It's also going to be very restrictive. This is called the pet door era. Now, if you think of a door, and I don't know if you have any pets, I don't because I don't like animals and they scare me. But if you have like a door and you have a pet, like a dog, you would have like a small door at the bottom and you would let your pet come in and out. So we call this period the pet door era because the United States wants to go back in time, and actually they favor Northwestern Europeans. They want to say, we don't want all these other people here. We want to go back and change time and stay in the past where we preferred these Northwestern Europeans. So if you look, it says pro-restrictionist groups. If you were a restrictionist, you wanted to restrict the amount of immigrants coming in, and you preferred, again, to go back and preferred those Northwestern Europeans. So they're going to put in place a quota system, and then you're going to see three laws there, 1921, 1924, and 1929. Now, a quota is putting a limit on the number of people entering the U.S. So they would say, for example, we're only going to allow 20,000 people to come in, and we're going to pick, those people have to be from Germany. Those people have to be from Ireland. Okay, so it's an era of restrictive legislation to where the United States will not only continue to bar Asians, but they will again bar various Europeans. They will have a pet. Their pet will be Northwestern Europeans. And here are some really specifics about the law that you can look at. The Immigration Act of 1921, and hopefully this becomes clear as we go through this. 3% of the population of a country as of the 1910 census. So what they would do is they would go back to the 1910 census and they would say, all right, we'll look at the 1910 census. So, for example, if your population was 10,000, we'll let 3% of that come into the United States now. You're only going to see from 1920 to 1930, only 4 million people will enter the United States. So again, it's almost like society stops after World War I and says, wait a minute, we have all these people coming in. We have all these people that are not like, quote, small n Native Americans. You see another thing, they want to still go back in time. 1924 with the Reed-Johnson Act, 2% of population of a country as of the 1890 census. So just to clarify, they go back to the 1890 census and they say, oh, these people, for example, are Hungarian. So whatever their population was in 1890, we'll let 2% of that population come into the United States. So most Asians are going to be barred and ineligible for citizenship. In 1929, they want to go back even further. They want to go back to the 1920 census. They would also limit the population to, the limit total to 150,000. So you see really each year, or as we get through the 1920s, they are wanting less people to come in, less immigrants to come in, and that's the purpose of this law. They wanted to have a pet, and they wanted to, again, get these numbers, these census. This is, you know, especially the 1891. It would give a preference to and a favor to Northwestern Europeans. So we're going to look at some data if that doesn't make sense. You can see overall there's going to be a huge decrease in immigration. Total, we were just a little at 4 million. This is during all of the pet door era. So if you see here this quota system, you're going to see what immigrant groups and what countries are going to be favored. You're going to see, as I said, the Northwestern Europeans, Great Britain and Germany and Ireland are going to be favored, and they're going to be able to allow more people to come in because in the 1920s they look back in time to the 1910 census, and then they also look back to the 1890 census. Another example too, this is like the 2% chart. You just look at the 3% chart. So you're going to see again what two countries. And again, you don't have to worry about, oh, what does this chart say? You're going to see that Great Britain, Ireland, and Germany are going to get preference. So they're going to allow, these are the pets of the United States, they're going to get more people to come in. Now, if you look at this funnel and you look at this gate, all these people want to come in during the pet door era, but they're only going to allow for 3% or 2% of the population, depending on what census they're able to use. So you can see here, if you look at this chart, Northwestern Europeans, 1890, for example, they're going to have a majority, and especially if they go back here, you're going to see the red is Northwestern Europeans, the blue is Southeastern Europeans, and you're going to see because of the quota laws that were established in the 1920s, it's going to give that favor back to the red, which is the Northwestern Europeans. So it's almost like society didn't like and didn't prefer the Southeastern Europeans, and they wanted to, in law, give Northwestern Europeans a preference. This is when the KKK becomes a national organization. They wanted 100% Americanism, WASP, which stands for White Anglo-Saxon Protestant. And so you're going to see that despite the racism and the prejudice that we know the KKK is known for and the segregation, now it's going to take on really an anti-immigrant mentality. Just to give you a really specific example of how during the 1920s many Americans were very fearful and discriminatory towards foreigners. Sacco and Vanzetti, they were arrested for robbery and murder, but basically the judge in the case was supposed to be impartial. He was supposed to be very fair and neutral. He was talking about how these two men believed in anarchists and they were radical, and they're going to be Italian immigrants. And again, we know today that more than likely Vanzetti actually did commit the crime. We don't have a lot of evidence for Sacco, but we know that at the time the trial was held, there wasn't evidence to convict these two people. So they were basically convicted, and they're going to die on the electric chair because they were immigrants, because they were anarchists. If you're an anarchist, you basically believe in the overthrow of the government. This is also a time during the Red Scare where there's this dislike and fear of communism going on. So this just kind of shows you, again, how this is seen as a really bad time for immigration. Immigration slowed drastically. Obviously, the Great Depression is going to be huge. But in 1940, at the end of the Depression, Congress passed the Smith Act, and it required all non-citizen alien residents to register with the government. Moving on to our second part of this, which we will just take one slide on this, and we'll talk about the rest of it in class. Most of you guys know December 7th, the day which will live in infamy, Pearl Harbor happened. And I'm going to talk to you about what is done to American citizens and American immigrants. Japanese Americans, according to Executive Order 9066 in 1942, they were going to be sent to relocation camps. This was absolutely unfair. There was not a shred of evidence that portrayed an act of disloyalty. They had no evidence about any Japanese Americans being disloyal. These were Japanese Americans that some were actually born in Japan and migrated to the United States, and some of these immigrants were actually born in the United States. It did not matter. They're going to lose everything and sent to relocation camps. The United States court will uphold this in Korematsu versus the United States. So the second part of the pet door era, we are going to talk about all the discrimination against Japanese Americans. All right, make sure that you have your open door, door ajar, and we will begin talking more about pet door tomorrow.